An economic threat was leveled. The weapon, a potential 25% tariff. The target? The very heart of the Canadian economy, its auto industry. The threat was existential, aimed at bringing a nation's industrial core to its knees. But Washington may have made one critical miscalculation. They forgot who they were picking a fight with. This isn't just a story about tariffs and trade deals. This is the story of how a nation, from its government halls to its factory floors, launched a multi-pronged counteroffensive. It's the story of how Canada's government, its unions, and its businesses united to fight back and save a cornerstone of their economy. It began with a threat that many hoped would never materialize. The Trump administration, citing national security concerns, took aim at its closest ally. The message was clear. A crippling 25% tariff could be applied to Canadian-made vehicles and auto parts. For an industry built on decades of free and open trade, it felt like a declaration of economic war. To understand the scale of this threat, you have to understand the North American auto industry. It's not a collection of separate factories. It's one giant integrated machine. A single part might cross the US-Canada border up to 7 or 8 times before a car is fully assembled. Engine blocks from Michigan, transmissions from Ontario, software from California, assembly in Windsor. For 50 years this system worked flawlessly. Suddenly, every one of those border crossings was a new battleground. The threat of tariffs wasn't just a tax. It was a grenade tossed into the gears of this finely tuned machine, threatening to shatter supply chains and destroy decades of cooperation. The stated goal from Washington was blunt, with officials openly saying they wanted to see car assembly move back to America. The threat felt personal, and for the hundreds of thousands of Canadians whose livelihoods depend on this industry, it was a direct assault on their future. The question on everyone's mind was deafening. Would Canada fold, or would it fight? The impact wasn't hypothetical for long. The mere threat of tariffs sent a chilling effect across the sector. Investment decisions were put on ice. Automakers, who planned their production lines years in advance, were suddenly staring into a void of uncertainty. How could you invest billions in a Canadian plant when, overnight, your products could be priced out of your largest market? The anxiety on the factory floor was palpable. While widespread shutdowns directly linked to the auto tariff threats were averted, the instability rocked an industry already dealing with broader restructuring. Economists warned that a full-blown tariff war could trigger a continental recession. This wasn't just about big corporations. It was about small parts manufacturers, family-owned businesses that had supplied the auto giants for generations. It was about truck drivers, logistics coordinators, and entire towns built around the auto sector. The constant threat was a slow-motion disaster, menacing an entire ecosystem. The core of the problem was simple. A trade war on this front wouldn't just hurt Canada. It would inflict massive self-harm on the US economy, a fact that seemed lost in the political storm. But that provided little comfort to the Canadian workers facing the immediate threat. The fight for survival had begun. Faced with this threat, Canada didn't just stand by. A coordinated multi-front counteroffensive was launched, mobilizing the full force of the country's government, unions, and businesses. The Canadian government refused to back down. Their response was strategic and forceful. They immediately announced that for every dollar of tariffs the US imposed on steel and aluminum, Canada would hit back with its own dollar-for-dollar retaliatory tariffs on American goods. A list was drawn up targeting everything from steel and aluminum to orange juice and whiskey, products chosen to maximize political pressure in key US states. But when it came to autos, Ottawa used a scalpel, not just a hammer. Instead of a blanket tax, the government unveiled a clever policy, a tariff remission framework. The government told automakers that if they kept production and investment in Canada, They could receive exemptions from Canada's retaliatory tariffs on U.S. goods they needed to import. It was a strategic carrot-and-stick approach designed to reward loyalty. The message was clear: if you stand with Canada, Canada will stand with you. The government also rolled out financial aid to support workers and industries caught in the crossfire. While the government fought at the diplomatic level, the unions took the fight to the corporate and public arenas. Unifor, the union representing over 40,000 Canadian auto workers, became the voice of the resistance on the ground. Led by its fiery president at the time, Jerry Dias, Unifor was relentless. Dias was a constant presence in the media and was even invited by the Canadian government to act as an advisor during the tense trade negotiations. He clearly and powerfully explained what was at stake, arguing that the tariffs would be devastating for workers on both sides of the border. The union didn't just talk, they acted. When General Motors announced the closure of its Oshawa assembly plant amid these tensions, Dias launched a high-profile campaign calling for the government to penalize GM for moving production out of the country while still benefiting from the trade corridor. Unifor's stance was defiant. They understood that this was more than a trade dispute. It was a fight for the future of manufacturing in Canada. By meeting with politicians and keeping the pressure on, they made sure the workers' voices were heard loud and clear. Caught in the middle of this political firestorm, the industry itself had to adapt. The Canadian Vehicle Manufacturers Association and the Automotive Parts Manufacturers Association became crucial advocates, testifying before both Canadian Parliament and U.S. Commerce Department hearings. Their argument was based on logic and economics. The integrated supply chain meant that tariffs were a tax on everyone, including American consumers. Companies navigated a web of new regulations to minimize the damage. The new trade deal that ultimately replaced NAFTA, the USMCA, or CUSMA in Canada, added another layer of complexity. It required a higher percentage of a vehicle's parts to originate in North America to remain tariff-free, jumping from 62.5% up to 75%. But something else happened. The crisis spurred a new wave of innovation. Instead of abandoning Canada, some automakers doubled down. Supported by federal and provincial government investments, companies like Stellantis announced massive, multi-billion-dollar plans to retool their Canadian plants in Brampton and Windsor to build the next generation of electric vehicles. These weren't just upgrades, they were fundamental transformations, securing the long-term future of those facilities, and even adding new battery R&D centers. It was a calculated bet that the future of the auto industry would be built on Canadian soil. This fight demonstrated a level of unity and resilience that many didn't see coming. But the battle for the future of Canada's auto industry is far from over. The trade landscape is constantly shifting, and the next challenge is always just around the corner. What do you think? Was Canada's three-pronged counteroffensive the right strategy? Should they have been even tougher? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe in the importance of stories like this, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss what's next. In the end, the most crippling auto tariffs were avoided, largely thanks to the new USMCA trade agreement that set new rules for tariff-free vehicle exports. The immediate crisis was averted, but the conflict left a permanent mark. It was a wake-up call, demonstrating just how vulnerable the deeply integrated industry was to political whims. The fight back, however, proved something more profound. It showed that when faced with a common threat, the Canadian government, its unions, and its businesses could unite with a singular purpose. They used diplomacy, public pressure, and strategic investment to protect a vital national interest. The battle isn't over. The USMCA itself is scheduled for a mandatory joint review in 2026, which could reopen many of these old wounds. The global shift to electric vehicles presents its own set of challenges and opportunities. But the tariff war forged a new sense of resolve. Canada proved it would not be a passive observer in its own economic destiny. It showed the world that when its back is against the wall, it will stand its ground, innovate, and fight back. And that resilience may be its greatest strength on the uncertain road ahead.